recording. So, and once again, for the people who are joining us on the recording, you're very, very welcome. You're very welcome to session 4. You know, I was really delighted, and with last night, AFA sent out a reminder to all of the, I think around 400 or 400 and something people who have signed up for this program. And I was really delighted to see that even at session 4, that those reminder emails got about a 15 or 16% opening rate. Now, I don't know if you know much about mail, you know that typical opening rate is probably half to 1% or some such crazy sort of low number. So it just told me and told us that we had tapped into something that really had people's interest, and we're getting great engagement with the recordings as well. So thank you for your interest. Thank you for all of the feedback and the questions you've been sending between the sessions. And we're excited here to be at the last session. Not excited because it's the last one, but excited to be getting through the material, which I think this last one really speaks to where we all are in the world these days, and that is in a place where we really do need some support to be able to deal with the stressful challenges that the world offers, to be able to build up our resilience. So let's dive straight in. As has become traditional on pretty much all the sessions that I do, I'm going to just suggest that if you can at all, that you close down any tabs that might be open on your machine, you know, switch off your phone, etc. Because you'll get just more out of the session if you're absolutely here. And the other reason that we do this every week is that making a decision and setting an intention to be focused on a single task is really the beginning of mindfulness, that focus that comes from awareness that, hey, here's where I want to put my attention, and I'm deciding that this is the most important use of my time at this point in time, and eliminating all distractions from it. So quite apart from the fact that this lovely image from Shintan Jain, from the fact that the research suggests that multitasking leaves you with a lot of unused brain juice, I'm not sure that's entirely technically correct in terms of the terminology, but certainly single tasking, that is deciding with intention, here's what I'm going to focus on, and moving that focus intentionally around is much more effective than trying to multitask, which the brain just can't do. So that said, let's move on. So all of us come into these meetings always with life going on in the background and the foreground. And so lots of umbilical cords stretching out of the backs of our heads and our bodies back to what we were involved in before this session and what we know we're going to be involved in afterwards. And sometimes to be able to bring ourselves present and just to be here for this session and not to be distracted by the myriad thoughts going through our heads, it's necessary just to indulge. It's some kind of palate cleanser that moves you from one task to another, you know, that brings you present. And I always think of these short practices as kind of being like sorbet, you know, that you take between courses. You're doing one task, you're doing one thing, and you decide you're going to switch to another. And rather than diving straight from one into another, just intentionally stopping and saying, for a minute or a minute and a half, let me just mark the end of that task and mark the beginning of the next one. And so let's do that. Let's close a few tabs and bring ourselves present, just with a simple pair of practices that we used in session 1. And you'll see why I'm going back to these, because I'm going to come back at the end and I'm going to show you some of the neuroscience behind one of them, which is very relevant to today's topic. So let me invite you, wherever you happen to be, in your office or whatever, or home, and assuming that you're sitting down, I just invite you to bring your attention to your seat and your feet. So just become aware of your feet on the ground and your seat on the chair if you're sitting. And just notice, allow yourself to reach out your awareness to notice what sensations tell me my feet are on the floor, what sensations tell me my behind and my thighs are on the chair. And just noticing that for a few moments. And I'll start the clock here so we don't go too long. And just allowing everything else just to slip away, and just bring your attention just to those two simple areas, noticing what sensations there are to notice. And as you allow your attention to drop to your feet, You might become aware of the sensation of gravity rooting your feet to the ground, or you may notice hot or cold, or tingling or numbness. And it doesn't matter. There is no right or wrong answer. Whatever there is to notice, just notice. So I'm going to go quiet for about 40 seconds and just allow you to attend or pay attention to any sensations in your seat and feet. And it's okay to get distracted when that happens. Simply bring the attention gently back to what you were paying attention to. And now even as you feel yourself settling onto your seat and your feet and allowing yourself to become aware of that, let's just adapt our breathing just slightly. And normally the practices that we're doing on this program involve paying mindful attention to the breath. But this time we're just going to adjust the rate of breathing so it's a little bit slower, and adjust the out breath so that it is as much longer than the in breath as is comfortable for you. So if on an in breath you're counting 1, 2, 3, on the out breath, seeing can you get 4, 5, 6, or just getting it a little bit longer. And let's take 6 breaths like that, just keeping it slow and allowing the out breath just to become as much longer as is comfortable than the in breath, not straining. So it's just 6 breaths like that. I'll go quiet while you do that, and I'll practice with you. And then when you release the next breath, just nice and slowly, let's carry on. So those 2 practices, very, very simple ones, and we sent out the link to the recordings and some details on them after session 1. As I say, they're great for transitioning from one task to another, because sometimes we get into this sort of hamster wheel where we have a big to-do list and we just rush from one to another, and it gives us that frantic sense. And if you can stop for those few celebratory breaths, few breaths of celebration every time you change from one task to another, it can really just ground you a little bit more. But I'm going to show you by the end of the session some of the science behind the breathing part of that, because it's really, really tuned into the topic we're dealing with together today. So here's what we said at the beginning of the program, that we were addressing this program really to anybody, but with a specific focus on salespeople, or people who work with salespeople, where they're coaching, consulting, training, or managing them, and looking particularly at how we can apply mindfulness and emotional intelligence techniques to the challenges they had. And that was particularly the focus last week, and particularly focus on session 1. But outside of that, a lot of the focus that we bring to bear in a program that's aimed at salespeople is very much the focus you bring to bear on anybody, on a program it's aimed pretty much at anybody who has a stressful, challenging lifestyle. And this week, we're looking really squarely in the face of the most challenging part of lifestyle, most of our lifestyles, and that is having to deal with the stress, having to deal with the challenges of difficult emotions and difficult situations, and the impact they have upon us in stressing us. So last week, as always, I gave you some homework, some for next time stuff. And I'm not going to jump through the first two, but I'm really curious just about the third one here, and that is the basic attention and the body scan practice. And let me just get you guys up onto the screen, get the list of names up here. And I just want to ask you, and again, this is not school teacher checking in on the pupils. I'm just curious, how many people since last week had an opportunity to practice particularly the body scan, but the basic attention and body scan practices? And you can use the hands up facility. Whoa, great. Yeah, so getting quite a number of hands popping in there. Thank you. That's super. And you know what? If you didn't get to practice, that's okay. Every day gives you an opportunity to start that again, and we're going to give you the tools that you need to take this practice beyond the program. You can start with this anytime. But we covered the body scan last week because we were talking about noticing when you become triggered during meetings and in front of people, and noticing when you or your client or prospect becomes triggered, and when emotions start to affect the day-to-day dealings in those interactions. And in part of that, we said that one of the key things to understand is that emotions arise initially in the body. You know, people tend somehow to think of emotions as something that happens in their heads, whereas they are actually really, strictly speaking, using the definition that the physiologists use, they are physiological sensations or responses that are triggered in our nervous system in response to things going on in the outside world. So then, of course, and we'll see in a few moments how that works, but then, of course, when the brain, the thinking part of our brain, our prefrontal cortex and our emotional brain becomes aware of those sensations, the way we react into the outside world, we tend to put labels on them. And sometimes we get caught up in our head with we're angry, or we're irate, or we're happy, or we're sad, or we're depressed, or whatever it happens to be. But the main point I wanted to make last week is that emotions arise in the first instance in the body. And it takes a finite time for those signals to get to the thinking brain. So the best opportunity to be able to monitor yourself and become aware of your emotions and aware of the way they're affecting the way you show up and the things you say and the decisions you make is by developing an awareness of emotions as they arise in the body, sensations as they arise in the body. And even before we did the body scan, we were kind of doing that with the seat and feet and those exercises. But the body scan really is a deliberate practice to get you familiar with the default state of your body, the sort of sensations and feelings that are just normal in your body at any one time, so that when you do experience a blip in emotion, whether it's joy or it's anger or it's excitement or it's shame or whatever it happens to be, that you notice that arising. Because in noticing it arising and being aware of the sensation, you get a choice not just to react, which is often the way we do to react out of control, but to respond, and hopefully to respond wisely if we can notice the emotions in advance. And that's what the body scan was about. And one body scan won't do it for you. It's about doing that practice often enough that you start to notice that what's normal for you, what's a normal set of sensations, and that then you become so accustomed to looking at the set of sensations in your body that next time you feel joy, and let me suggest this to you, which I think I did last week, next time you feel joy, you see your child or your grandchild or somebody you love, that you notice and you bring attention to the body. So, oh, that's what love feels like. I can feel it there around my heart, or here's what anger feels like, or here's what frustration feels like. And the more you pay attention to the body, the more skilled you become at noticing the way you're reacting to the world around you. And that's really, really useful when it comes to managing stress. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at what Harris talks about, the skill of not getting caught up in what's going on in your head. Because when we become stressed, when we become caught up in our head, or when we become stressed, it's because we've gotten caught up in our head with the emotional reaction to whatever is going on with us. And I loved Harris's book, 10% Happy or a Little Bit Irreverent, but I love his definition where he says mindfulness is the ability to know what's going on in your head, but not get caught up in it, not get caught up on the stories, not start telling yourself stories about what's going on and getting stressed out. This guy is probably the poster child for emotional distress or emotional stress. And for those of you who come from a culture where he's not known, let me just tell you that this cartoon character, comic book character, is a guy who has a highly triggerable emotional system. And his famous catchline is, "You wouldn't like me when I'm angry." And when somebody gets him really, really angry, well, then he turns into this huge, hulking, seriously angry green punter who breaks everything up. And so he's the poster child for a lack of resilience, or a lack of the ability to deal with stress. So when we talk about resilience in this session, we're talking about the ability to maintain your emotional balance or regain it after a setback. So after you get triggered by something, somebody makes you angry, somebody makes you sad, somebody gets you stressed, that you're able to regain your emotional balance rather than wallowing in anxiety or anger or depression or other negative emotions. And this definition, by the way, the reason I use it is it's from a lady called Sharon Begley, and she's a co-researcher with a man called Richard Davidson, who is the man when it comes to neuroscientific research into meditation. He's been at it for about 20 or 25 years, and Begley has been up there alongside him with it. So they look at this topic of resilience a lot, and I think it's a lovely, lovely definition. So all of those times that you get triggered during the day and you get triggered into being incredible hook, angry or down or depressed or whatever, resilience is to be able to manage that and just maintain that emotional or regain that emotional balance as quickly as possible. Just to get us started on the topic of what's the opposite of resilience, I'm going to give you an observation test. Some of you may have seen it before, some of you won't. And I'm going to play a little piece of video. It only goes on for about a minute and a half. And I just want you to pay very close attention to it. It's fairly quiet. So if in your office, if you're not in an office where there's lots of people around, you might want to crank the volume up a little bit. And so let me play it. And at the end of it, I'm going to ask you to tell me in the chat box what you noticed going on. So let's play the piece of video. And as ever, Aoife, just let me know if there's any problem with the sound. Folks, sometimes the sound runs slow. That's okay. But I just want to make sure that you are actually getting sound. So here we go. Actually, I suspect you can't be. 1 second.
That was working perfectly, Deiric.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, folks. I was certain that because I could hear it, you couldn't. Okay, let's go again. Okay, doesn't matter how many times I see that, it still scares me. Please, while it's still there, please get onto the chat line and tell me, what are you noticing? What happened when that thing came up, and what are you noticing in your body? Just drop into that and let me get the chat up there. While you're doing that, I'll continue chatting. So just pop anything you like just up onto the thing. And somebody said my heart jumped, my heart rate increased. I went from calm to highly stressed. Sincere apologies, Chris. I hope you'll get an evening that'll undo that stress for you. Hardy said some feeling in the gut. Meta said I was very awake all of a sudden. Benita, and I know she won't mind me saying this, but she said, ha ha ha, you scared the shit out of me. Jack said fear. Somebody else said freaked out, tingling sensation in the chest, more shivering, etc. Now what you've just seen what you've just seen is what we looked at in the first session. You've seen that emotional system, the emotional part of your brain being triggered. And if you recall, what we said before was that if you stuck a pen, don't do this. If you stuck a pen in your ear and you stuck a pen in your eye, where they crossed would be around the center of the emotional brain, the amygdala, which is the body's fear center. And we said in session 1 that every experience you have, every thought that you have, every external stimulus like that video, etc., passes through that emotional brain, which filters it to see, is there any threat here or is there any reward here? And we're programmed to run away from threats, hence the reaction that you had there, and to move towards rewards. And so your body, thank you, Andre, your body is reacted literally physically, and some of you may have noticed what was going on. What we want to do is help you develop a higher resolution awareness of what's going on so that you pick up more of those sensations. Now, I'm going to show you another video. I swear to God, may God strike me down, or one of you strike me down if there's any scare in it. I swear to God there's not. But this gentleman does a really nice job in 2 minutes of saying what just happened in your body, because I want you to see just how complex it is so that you understand that even something as complex as that can actually be short-circuited fairly easily. So let me share this next video with you, and it runs just about 2 minutes. Here we go. So it can't communicate with you in words. It can only communicate in those sensations. Sensations which are passed to the thinking part of the brain afterwards, and which we later encode and we give labels, and we call it I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm depressed, I'm down, etc. But our first opportunity to see these and observe these and notice these things arising before they start to get inside our heads and creating stories that start us on a spiral is the arising of those sensations in our body. So that's why we practice the body scan. Now, that makes a huge amount of sense when you look at our ancestors of 300 billion years ago, and you think of the world that they lived in when there were lots of predators that were much more dangerous to them than they were to the predators. And so that fight or flight response was a really relevant and really fantastic survival response. Because it helped people to be in motion doing something about a threat to their existence before their thinking brain had even caught up. But that part of the brain still works pretty much the same today as it did back 300 million years ago, when we don't have as many existential threats. And it responds to every threat, however big or small. Anything we perceive as being a threat tends to have this impact upon the system, loading us with adrenaline, loading us with cortisol, the stress hormone, getting our heart going faster, and so on and so forth. Even a letter like this arrived to 4 years ago. I was on the telephone opening my mail, talking to a buddy, and I opened it up and I was told by the tax service that I was going to have a tax audit. Now, in this country, that means that they can go back 5 years. And if they find anything, they have permission to go back another 5 years. And if they find anything, go back another 5 years. And if they find that you've underpaid tax, you pay the shortfall, you pay a penalty, and you pay interest on it. So it's a pretty scary happening. So I was on the telephone talking to a buddy, John. I'll never forget it. As I opened and I read, "You've been selected for a revenue audit," I noticed myself having exactly the same response as you had to the zombie. Felt my heart beating faster, felt my breathing becoming faster, felt myself starting to sweat, and in general, getting into that fight or flight response. And when my brain caught up, when my thinking brain caught up, it said, "Deiric, you're such a coward when it comes to tax that you always have told your advisors that if there's an issue, or if there's ever a doubt, please overpay, because I'm such a cardy cat that I don't want that." But in that moment when I opened it, I was having that reaction. You have that reaction when you get a call from a client or a message from a client saying, "Call me back, it's urgent," and you don't know what it's about. when you hear somebody on the end of the phone start a sentence with, I really want to talk to you about this. When the boss sends an email and says, see me in the office. When you get a call from home that you weren't expected. Myriad circumstances trigger the same part of the brain. And the problem with those triggers is that they can have a really dramatic impact on us over time. So small things like an email from an irate client can get that same process working in the system. Now, first thing in the morning might not be a big deal that you have an irate client airing at you. You might not like it, but it doesn't take a huge amount out of you. You recover from that pretty quickly. But if half an hour later, you have another stressful incident, maybe, I don't know, maybe when you're crossing the road, you nearly get run down. Well, then you got this sort of cumulative effect where there's more adrenaline in your system, more cortisol, where your heart has had no time really to recover from the first shock. And if you get 3 or 4 or 5 stressful or challenging emotions in a short period of time, it can start to have the effect of causing that amygdala, that emotional part of the brain, to work a little bit like a revving. Regardless of whether the word revving means anything to you, where you come from, I think you can hear what's going on with that car. Somebody is sitting in the car, it's not in gear, they've got their foot on the gas or the accelerator, and they're pressing it up and down, and the engine is turning revolutions. In English, we'd say we're revving the engine. What are you doing when you rev the engine? You're building up the cycles of the engine, it's turning over really, really quickly, so that if you could slap it into gear, you would take off like a rocket because the engine's already running quickly. While it's, before you slap it into gear, it's burning fuel, it's generating heat, it's making a lot of noise, it's generating exhaust, and it's just doing no particular good. It's even wearing the engine out over time. And when we get too many of those amygdala challenges in a day or a week or even over a long period, our amygdalas can get to a stage where we're kind of jumpy, where it doesn't take much to knock us over the edge. And you've had those days. I know you have, because you're human, days where you've said, oh, for God's sakes, if anything else happens, I'm going to scream. Or I just can't take this. What the hey? Why is this happening to me? Dr. Dan Siegel, who's well worth looking up on YouTube, talks about when you get to that stage where it's almost like let me see if I can do this with the camera. Yeah, you're like a man or a woman hanging off a cliff by your fingertips. And you're just barely hanging on. And all it takes is one trigger of that amygdala and boom, you're gone. You fall, you collapse. And that's where we fall into stress. And we get stressed once or twice, probably not a big deal. But over time, if we take on too much stress and we can't deal with it, and we get too many of these triggers and we basically swallow them down, eventually we get to a stage where we become just terribly, terribly fatigued. The amygdala is going like mad. It's very, very easy to trigger. Our emotional reserves are gone so that we're jumping at the slightest noise. We're jumping at the slightest thing makes us angry, makes us depressed, makes us sad, and so on. And where this often happens, and this is just one way, but where we often see this happen is with thoughts. And I talk here about runaway thoughts. So this is Genos man, and believe it or not, he's not unhappy, but he's not obviously uproariously happy, laughing his head off. But he's supposed to look pretty content there. Now, so I wonder, are you ever feeling like Genos man, and you're feeling quite relaxed, and everything's good with the world, and then suddenly some thought comes into your mind, and your mood falls off a cliff, and in a short period of time, just one thought. And kind of you go from being, hi, happy, clappy, smiley, and you just fall off a cliff and your mood falls down. And what's going on frequently is because every thought is valenced by an emotion. Every thought that you have is just like somebody talking to you or interacting with you. An unpleasant thought is just as effective at triggering the amygdala as our zombie was, and it evokes an emotional response. And what we tend to do is engage with that emotional response and wonder what's going on there and try to think it through. And, we'll often use that language. hang on a second, I'm just feeling a bit stressed. Let me think it through. So we start to think more and more about the way we're feeling, and we start to focus upon it, and we start to analyze it. And the more we analyze it, the deeper it becomes, and the bigger the emotional reaction to it becomes. And you see Mr. Genos man starting to become a little bit beaten down, so that, after a period, maybe after an hour, that it's gotten to a stage where, as I say, your mood has fallen off a cliff, and you just got this really, really emotional thing going on in your head. You're totally caught up on a story. Things that gave you joy before don't give you joy. Things that seemed full of possibility before seem hopeless now. And you've got that really beaten down look of this gentleman. And frequently, that's the way stress happens. It's a trigger, and we engage with it, and we get the thoughts become stories about what's going on, and the story becomes more intense, and we engage with it, and the emotion gets bigger and bigger, and until it gets to a point where it just becomes too heavy to carry, and that's really what we talk about as being emotional stress. Well, the traditional way of dealing with that is to try and suppress it. So people will say, I'm not feeling too good. Will we go down and get a few beers? Or I'm not feeling too good. Let's go to the cinema. And, short term, that may work. That's suppression. Just push it out of your head, replace it with something else. Or think positive thoughts and try and just cover it up. Rather than managing them, trying to suppress them. And suppression just simply doesn't work, because basically that which we resist persists. And Carl Jung was the first to postulate that idea that the more we try to resist something, the more it persists, particularly a thought. And I'll give you an example. I wonder, have you ever been trying to control your eating, and you're thinking, hey, just my belt buckle's just getting a little more horizontal than I'd like, and you're trying not to eat too many empty calories, and then a thought comes into your mind. And that thought is, there's a nice bar of chocolate in the fridge. I would love to eat it. But you say, no. I don't want to eat that. I'm not going to eat that chocolate. And the moment you start saying, I'm not going to eat it, I'm not going to eat it, I'm not going to eat it, you start to cause that obsession, if you like, or sense of being fixed upon that chocolate. You start to grow that sense. I'm desperately looking for the word, but you start to fixate on the chocolate. And paraphrasing Carl Jung, somebody on the web said that what you resist not only persists, but it'll grow in size. So suppression and trying to push negative emotions under feel-good emotions, or passing pleasures, or hedonistic pleasure like a few drinks or a nice holiday, or looking forward to something in the future. It might be a short-term way of salving the way you feel, but long-term it really doesn't work. What we need to get into is managing those emotions skillfully. And that means dealing with them in a way that we take the power, if you like, away from the power to stress us. And there are a couple of dimensions to the skillful management, and they're really integrated into the practice I'm going to share with you. And the first one is acceptance. Now, by acceptance, I don't mean wallowing or giving in. Oh, poor me, my life is crap, and I just have to accept it because it's terrible. Acceptance is really more about, you know what, I'm going to have bad days. This is one of them. I don't particularly like it. I don't care for it. I hate it, but it's normal. It's natural. It's the human experience. And I'm just going to have to live with it. That's a sense of acceptance. Now, when we get into the practice, you'll see that this is kind of encoded into it. Then there's something that ties back to one of the definitions we used of mindfulness in the first session, where we said it was non-judgmental. And that is, we tend, when we feel down, to think, what's wrong? Because we should feel happy, clappy all the time. That's what the TV and everything tells us, that we should never feel bad. Life should be an endless parade, as Dan Harris says in one of his videos, of unicorns and rainbows. But having an attitude of, you know what, it's actually okay to feel bad. It's okay to feel down. It's okay to feel emotions that are not pleasant. It happens. It's useful. The third one is starting to notice how the emotion shows up in you. And we've already spoken a little bit about the physical manifestation of emotions as physiological sensation, and about how the body scan allows you to tune in and notice emotions as they're arising. And there are two benefits to that, one of which we'll share in a minute or two when we look at something with John Kabat-Zinn. But let me tell you the second one. When you start to notice that emotions are just physiological sensations that will come and go in your body and do come and go in your body with every thought, every stimulus that comes from outside, it starts over time to give you a certain freedom that says, I have these emotions are in me, but I don't have to follow them. I don't have to be angry because I feel anger. I don't have to become the Incredible Hulk because I'm becoming angered and I'm feeling anger at something. So it gives you the freedom of being able to say, I'm experiencing these emotions, but I don't have to live them. I don't have to be them. And then finally, I wonder, and I won't ask for a show of hands. I'll trust that you, statistically, you're probably like most groups, in that when I ask a group for a show of hands and I say, have you ever met somebody that on instinct, first time you met them and you don't know them from Adam, you just don't like them? And I ask for a show of hands, and about 90% of hands tend to go up, because most people have had that experience. You meet somebody, you just instinctively, and I see some people raising their hands there. Thank you, folks. Instinctively, they just trigger something in you. Now, that initial gut feeling, as we call it, is the emotional system reacting to some perceived threat from that person. God knows what it is, and God knows whether it's justified or it's relevant or it's correct. But that is your emotional brain looking at the Rolodex of the emotional experiences that you've had in the past, looking at the decisions that you've made, the interactions you've had, and trying to draw parallels between what's going on right now, the person you're just meeting, and what happened before and how you felt about it. And because, as I said before, it can't communicate with you in the language part of the brain, it just gives you these sensations. Now, that can be really useful data. It's not the enough data to be making decisions upon, but there's great research being done on high-frequency traders, for example, on the New York Stock Exchange, who are trained to notice their emotional reaction to potential opportunities and to use that as an additional piece of information when they made trading decisions. And those people made better decisions, made more profit, and lasted longer in their job. So our gut feelings are useful, very frequently useful data. So when we have negative emotions, it's very often useful to say, well, what's this telling me? Why am I reacting this way? Why does this situation make me feel this way? But so skillful management is accepting that I have emotions that I don't care for. I'm always going to have emotions that I don't care for. But I'm not going to try and push them down. I'm going to deal with them. And the practice I'm going to share with you is going to help you to do that. That they are coming and going all the time, and you don't have to come and go with them. That's the first thing. Second thing, I love his language where he talks about thoughts self-liberating. A lot of our stress comes from getting caught in the head with the stories that we tell ourselves that get us going in these ever-decreasing circles, these ever tighter, more stressful circles. And what he talks about is, if we, instead of engaging with the thoughts and the stories, instead of saying, hey, listen, I've really got to analyze what's going on in here, if we can just make it become aware of these emotions and aware of these emotions are going on, that it's almost like touching a soap bubble and it goes poof. And again, one of my favorite authors, Dr. Daniel Siegel, he talks about when you're triggered and when the emotional brain is really in that amygdala hijack situation, when you're in the height of stress, the effect of it is that it cuts off communication with the thinking part of the brain. By bringing awareness back to those thoughts and giving them labels and noticing them, you're actually really bringing the activity in the brain back into the thinking part, back into the prefrontal cortex. And so the practice that we're going to do now is designed just to do just that. It's designed to bring that thinking, take the power out of those emotions, bring the activity in the brain back into the prefrontal cortex. And as Kabat-Zinn would have said, just to touch those emotion bubbles as they arise, just not engaging with them, not analyzing them, but just basically touching them. And to demonstrate, or to allow us to rehearse our way through through this practice, I'm going to encourage you to think about a recent incident where you were triggered into an emotion that you didn't care to feel, an unpleasant emotion that had an unpleasant impact upon you. And it might have been something that happened that triggered you into anger or fear or sadness or a sense of loss or shame or whatever it is, but something where you just thought, I don't like this, and your inclination was to suppress it. Now, if we're talking about a scale of 1 to 10, it's useful for this practice to have something that is recent and that had enough impact upon you that you'll remember it, but we don't want to work with something that's really, really, really strong. So on a scale of 1 to 10, you're looking for an incident recently that you've experienced that you feel you can bring back to mind. There's probably about a 5 or a 6. It caused a big enough emotional impact upon you that you can, when you think about it, you can almost feel it again, but not so big that I'm going to send you back out into the world re-experiencing that experience and starting to get into that talk about it. So bring something like that to mind, and we're going to do a practice that's called stopping and dropping, that is designed to take advantage of that quality of emotions that Kabat-Zinn referred to. So let me get my clock up here. So please get yourself into a sitting position where you're sitting upright, but not erect, not stiff. And as you do sit upright, with your feet flat on the ground and your hands wherever it's comfortable, on your lap if you like, not interlaced, ideally just relaxed and in your lap. Just allow yourself to settle. If you feel it's the end of a day in some parts of the world, that for people who are on here, if you feel yourself, your shoulders are up, your jaw is clenched, your forehead is a little bit wrinkled, you might just consciously sort of shake it out, let it go a little bit. And what we're going to do in this practice, as you settle there, is we're just going to settle with the seat and feet again on the 6 breaths, which I'm not going to talk you through much. And then we're going to do a very, very little or a small amount of mindful breathing. And then we'll go into the practice proper. So if you're ready, please just allow yourself to settle in that nice, alert posture. And if it's convenient where you are, for you to close your eyes, and that feels comfortable for you, well, then do so. Many people find that useful. If it's not convenient for you or you don't care to, well, then let me suggest that you just allow your gaze to fall down maybe a meter and a half away from you with a sort of a soft focus. So just gently, eyes down, just looking ahead of you with a soft focus, not focused on anything in particular. And bringing your attention first to, I beg your pardon, but starting first with the breath. And let's do what we did earlier. For reasons I'll explain later, let's do 6 breaths where you make a point of just making the out breath at least as long, and ideally 1.5 to 2 times longer than the in breath. So just slowing things down. If it helps to count, you can count on the in breath. If that was 3, we'll then count out and just see comfortably without straining if you can take 6 breaths or the out breaths a little bit longer. So let's just do that, and I'll shut up for these few moments while you do that. So please, just 6 breaths like that. And even as you continue with the breaths, just allow your attention just to drop to your seat and your feet. And just become aware of your seat and your feet and any sensations that are there, just as you continue to breathe. And when you finish that last of 6 breaths, just allow your attention just to settle onto the seat and feet. Just noticing, how do I know my feet are on the floor? How do I know I'm sitting in this chair? Noticing the sensations, what it's like. So now let's connect with an intention for doing this practice. And last week we spoke about intention when we spoke about having meetings with people where we would set the intention to open ourselves up and allow ourselves to experience what they're experiencing, to feel into their emotions. This week, we're setting an intention, which is always a powerful thing to do. With this practice, that we learn how to, over time, sit with difficult emotions and to explore them and find a way to be okay that they're there, not to feel the need to suppress them. So setting the intention that we'll find a way to be able to sit with difficult emotions and be okay with their presence until such time as they pass along. So let's take a moment of mindful breathing. So start to notice the breath as it goes into your body, seeing if you can follow the passage of an entire breath in past the nostrils, expanding the chest and the abdomen, and then back out of the body again. Just paying attention to a single breath at a time, seeing if you can follow it all the way in and all the way out. And when you finish following one breath, follow the next one the same way. And anytime you notice you're distracted, just putting a label like distraction or sound or thoughts, just noticing and then returning the attention back to the breath, knowing that every time you notice you've been distracted, just became a bit more mindful. So just following the breath in and out for the next minute or so. Just breathing in, breathing out, and being aware of the cycle of the breath going in and out. And should you hear a sound or a thought or a sensation occurs, just labeling it with anything that makes sense. Warm, cold, noise, car, and then just carrying on, paying attention to the breath for a few more seconds. So now we're going to consciously allow our attention to move from the breath, let the breath slip to the background, and start to pay attention to the body. And doing a systematic scan up and down the body, not quite as structured as last week, but doing a scan up and down the body, and just paying attention to any area where there's any noticeable sensation. So just scanning until you notice any sensation anywhere. And when you notice it, simply staying with it for a moment or two, just gently exploring how it shows up in the body. Exploring doesn't mean thinking deeply. It means maybe just simply labeling. Tight, cold, loose, sharp, whatever makes sense. And then allowing it to go and scanning again and just noticing those sensations. Not trying to change them, except perhaps if you do notice any particular tension or tightness where you're holding yourself tight, you might soften and just release. But otherwise, just noticing and giving them labels. Just noticing for a moment any sensations anywhere in the body. So just sit with that, scanning up and down for a minute or so. You're not trying to change any sensations. You're just allowing your awareness to note them, to label them, and then to move on again. Just simply noticing. So now, allowing the body to slip to the background of your attention, just bring your attention to any sounds that might be calling to you from your immediate environment. And just allow your attention to go to whichever, if any, of those sounds call to you most strongly. Just noticing the sounds, but not becoming lost in them, not becoming lost in thoughts or stories about them, but simply observing with curiosity and awareness, and perhaps even labeling them with an appropriate label. Now allowing yourself to notice if any thoughts are passing through your mind and calling to your attention. And once again, as with the sounds and the sensations, just allowing yourself to notice those thoughts as they pass through, explore them with curiosity, but without getting lost in them or lost in the story. And if at any stage you do find you're lost in the story, just coming back to wherever we are in the practice and carrying on. Labeling the thoughts if you want to. Thinking, catastrophizing, happy, sad, whatever. And so having paid a little attention to the breath and the sensations in your body and sounds in the environment, let's now just open up the awareness to anything and everything that calls for attention, whether it's a sensation in your body, a sound, a thought, and just allowing your attention to go wherever it is drawn. But all the time remaining present to what's in your field of awareness. So not getting caught up in stories, just allowing yourself to notice what's going on, what sensations, what sounds, what thoughts. Allowing them to come and go. Just being open, just being aware. So now, let me invite you to recall to mind the incident we spoke about, where you recently dealt with difficult thoughts or emotions. And we're going to bring that incident into the laboratory of the mind just to investigate it a little bit. And to do that, I'd like you just to allow yourself to go back to that time and experience that instant almost as if it was a film or a video that's being replayed, but one that has you participating in it. And as you move through that reliving of that incident, dropping every so often the beam of your attention to wherever you most noticeably experience any physical sensations that come along with the thoughts or the emotions that arise. So just playing through that, or remaining open to notice anything that's going on in the body in terms of physical sensations. Sometimes people are flooded with sensations. Sometimes there's not a thing. And either is okay. Don't be concerned. Just sit with whatever is happening. And if you do notice a sensation, let's see, can you move up closer to it, tuning into it, and intentionally directing your entire attention to the region of the body where the sensations are strongest? Putting a label on them, what do they feel like? Where are they manifesting? Are they tight? Are they loose? Are they large? Are they small? Do they pulse? And what can be useful for paying attention is to imagine that you're breathing into that part of the body on the in-breath, breathing out on the out-breath. Just exploring the sensations as you re-experience the incident. And try not to engage with the instant and the story itself, but just to notice and pay attention to the comings and goings of the sensations and their associated emotions. So just sitting with that for a few moments and paying attention and noticing. And remembering, we're not trying to fix anything. You're not trying to suppress emotions. You're just trying to notice what's going on in the body and bring some curiosity. You're just trying to bring those emotions, those sensations out into the glare of awareness, to touch the soap bubble, as Kabat-Zinn said. And if you find yourself resisting any of these feelings or becoming a little upset, remind yourself it's okay. It's absolutely normal to sometimes experience emotions which are not pleasant. It's normal not to want them, but there is no need to run from them. Simply devote your attention to the sensations, watching them coming and going as dispassionately as you might watch clouds moving across a clear sky. Feeling no need to do anything other than noting their presence in the nature, paying attention to the sensations. And if you're experiencing some sensations, see if you can use each in-breath and out-breath to bring you closer to being able to sit calmly without reacting to the sensation. Simply noticing their ebb and flow. Notice them come and go, but not needing to engage with them, not needing to get caught up in the story that goes with them. Simply being aware of the sensations. And when you do this practice in the future, if you find that you become lost in thought, which you often will, you find you've tuned out of the sensations and the incident, then you have a choice. You can either bring that difficulty back to mind again, or you can simply allow your attention to settle upon the breath and always do whatever feels right to you in that moment. So we're going to start bringing this practice to a close. And over the next minute, I just invite you to bring your entire attention back, just to settle on the breath, following it in and out, noticing when you've lost attention, and just restoring attention again. We'll do that just for one more minute. Sometimes in this practice, you can bring residual emotions and sensations out of the practice. And a good way of dealing with those is to just imagine that you're grasping those emotions and those sensations in your right hand and making a fist. So just close your hand into a tight fist, closing in those emotions, completely encapsulating them. And when you take your next deep breath, on the out breath, simply release the hand, release the emotions, and in your own time, let's carry on. And so, welcome back. So, all we've done there, and I invite you, by the way, please, if you could just share what was, I didn't mean to do that. Please just share on the chat line, what did you notice? What did you notice going on during that practice? What was your experience of it? So I'll get the chat up there in a moment. But meantime, let me just unpack it a little bit. You heard Kabat-Zinn talking about just bringing awareness to difficult emotions in the form of the sensations, touching the soap bubble, as he would say. Or as Dr. Dan Siegel would say, restoring the energy or the control, if you like, back to the thinking part of the brain by labeling those emotions. And so instead of getting caught up in that sort of thinking, notice the emotion, why am I feeling that emotion, thinking, notice the emotion, getting on that cycle that can get us into a stress place, rather to deal skillfully with the emotion simply by, when we notice an emotion triggers the thought, just to bring attention and to shine the full light of awareness on the sensations that accompany that emotional response. And that simple technique of stopping and dropping into the body and noticing the sensations that are coming up is the single most skillful way of dealing with those challenging emotions. And it takes practice to be able to do that when you're under pressure, because when you're under pressure, that's the last thing in the world sometimes that you feel like doing. But just that sort of practice, which is a formal practice, and a recording of it is available on the Insight Timer that we've provided you access to. That's a great way of managing and skillfully managing emotions after the fact. So at the end of a tough day, just kind of unpack them. But in the moment, you can simply bring your attention when you're under that sort of emotional pressure to, where am I feeling that in the body? What does it feel like? Letting the story go and just observing that sensation. That's what the stopping and dropping refers to. Stop and drop into the body. So let me just see, am I getting anything on the chat? No, where is the chat? Yes, there we go. And just see, has anybody shared anything? And yeah, so we are, somebody just asked there, what time are we supposed to end? We are ending at 1/2 the hour. So we're ending 10 minutes or thereabouts. So if anybody has any comments on it, really interested to know what your experience of that was. But while you're typing, let me carry on. Last week, I shared with you a practice which was originated by the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute. It's an absolutely wonderful, simple practice. And it involves just 3 breaths. So on the one side, you got that longer stopping and dropping practice. This What's Important Now practice is a phenomenal one when you're under that sort of pressure. And it involves, if you recall, and you can do that with me, okay, as you breathe 1 breath in. So it's 1 mindful breath. So let's do that together. So just Paying attention to one breath. And then on the second breath, just softening and loosening the body. So as you breathe in, just allowing the body to relax. And then finally, just on the third breath, just asking a question, what's important now? And it's a great grounding exercise that gets you, again, look at what the structure is. It's slowing down the body a little bit, and then it's bringing you back by looking at what's important now. You're really bringing that activity back into the prefrontal cortex. Thank you. Somebody just shared that they found it tough to keep the emotion in focus. And yeah, sometimes in this practice, I go around and around, and you get caught up in the story. And as soon as you start to engage, you get caught up in the story. And it's just like the breath meditation. It's a process of noticing you've been caught up, and then coming back and then restoring that focus, Jack, back to it. So that's one in the moment version, kind of really useful practice there. But the 6 breaths that I shared with you early on, there's a lot of research going on right now into breathing and its usefulness as an intervention in stress situations. And when you start to balance out the breathing so that the out breath is at least as long and ideally a little bit longer than the in breath, what you start is to tone a very, very important nerve, the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve runs right through the center of the nervous system. And it is the one that is responsible for lighting up all of those disparate things that go on when you're triggered into this fight or flight response. So the sympathetic nervous system does all of these things that you saw in that video earlier on. When you're triggered like that, and when it's triggered by the emotional brain, dilates your pupils so you can see the threat, inhibits salivation, accelerates the heartbeat, gets you breathing deeper, and basically gets you ready on if you like, a fight or flight or a combat footing. What's really interesting when you change the pattern of the breathing and you slow down the out breath is you trigger the off switch for that sympathetic nervous system, which is called the parasympathetic nervous system. And if on the right-hand side you're triggered into fight or flight, well, on the left-hand side, they often talk about this as rest and digest. And it literally is the off switch for the fight or flight response, the off switch for the sympathetic nervous system, just by taking half a dozen breaths where the out breath is the same or even longer than the in breath. It starts to send the signal to the body that we can switch off the alarm bells. You can start to tone it down. So using our revving analogy earlier on, if the accelerator or the gas in the car is the fight or flight response, and then the brake for slowing that right down is the parasympathetic nervous system, and you have access to that anytime. Once again, let me tell you, when you're triggered, probably the last thing in the world you think is going to work for you, because you're not really thinking with this part of the brain, you're thinking with the emotional brain. Probably you find that you don't want to stop and start breathing deeply. You want to take some action because you're in the grips of this fight or flight response. And that's a question of practice and programming and becoming more acquainted with it. But next time you're feeling really triggered, any one or a combination of these short practices is really useful just for helping as an intervention in the moment. And then the larger practice is a great one for building the resilience to be able to exercise that muscle that allows you to bring attention to those emotional responses. So it becomes more normal for the emotion to arise, you to notice as a physical sensation, touching the soap bubble and getting it going pop. So we are about, let me see, 9 minutes away from the end. So let me bring it to questions. That is basically the last practice that I wanted to share with you. And it's I'll show you how you can get access to recordings in a few moments. Really phenomenally important practice if you don't already have a strategy for dealing with challenging emotions. So with that said, let me switch off the share for a moment, invite Ava back in and see, have we any questions that we need to deal with?
Hi, Derek. Hi there. Yes, so we didn't have many questions come in yet. So folks, if you do now, feel free to chat them in there. I have a couple that came in from email, Derek, and one that came to me privately.
Okay.
So the first one is, will these recordings be available online and for how long?
We touched kind of on that before we started. Bottom line is we leave that up there for as long as I'm on this planet, and so I think we can say long term. Oh, please God, we can say long term. But yeah, they're going to be available in the long term, and we are going to put them together in a self-paced program for others who haven't attended this. So don't worry about them disappearing. They're not going anywhere.
Perfect. Thank you. The next one, is it possible to have a session like this inside an organization with the sales team, and how do we go about it?
Yeah, that's something we do all the time. If you're interested, if you have a client, or if you yourself are interested in having a sales team going through an in-house and a more deeper, wider version of this, absolutely, it's something we do fairly frequently, and we're just in the process, in fact, of rolling out a brand new version of the in-house version of this project. So do let me know if that's something you're interested in. And by the way, Aoife will kill me because I'm kind of letting out, but we will announce in September also to our certified partners that we're putting together a program, mindful emotional intelligence sales program, that they will be able to deliver to their clients. So we launched that at our annual conference in September. So if you're already a partner, that's good news for you. Certified practitioner. If you're not, and if the idea of delivering this stuff to your clients seems to have some value, just let us know. And Aoife, I see, has put up the email addresses to do that. So yeah. So any other questions there?
There was just one, Deiric. Would you have any advice for someone who wanted to convince their organization to work with EI or mindfulness?
Yeah, I think the most important thing about how do you do that? The most important thing about getting people convinced, or getting them on board, is to let them experience it, and let them have a short session. And I think a couple of ways you can go about it. If you already have the ability to be able to deliver guided meditations, well, then what I'd suggest in your organization is getting together a group of people who are already open to it and are aware of it, and start to get the news out that way. And if you're not, there are so many great recordings and guided meditations that can be used in group settings where you can play them for sort of group meetings like that. Other things, we do have a couple of, we'd need to think about it, Aoife, but we do have a couple of presentations, maybe some of them recorded, that give that sort of general introduction to mindfulness and emotional intelligence, and their efficacy, their usefulness in a commercial situation. And if you're in that situation, you're trying to convince a company and bring them on board, let us know, and we'll provide you with anything we can that helps with that.
Perfect. Thanks, Deiric. Laurence had a quick question, Deiric. It seems to me that EI is part of mindfulness and not separate from it. Do you confirm?
Yeah, it is hard to separate them, and once you make that connection, it's a little bit like those optical illusions. You know, once you've seen through the illusion, it's hard to see back to what you saw before you cracked the illusion. And once you, I think the key link there is that mindfulness always has been a way of building much greater self-awareness, emotional self-awareness, and so on. And emotional intelligence is founded upon self-awareness. It's the ability to notice what's going on with yourself, your emotions, how they're impacting the way you show up, the things you say, the way you behave. And developing that self-awareness gives you the capacity to more effectively develop awareness of others and all of the other things that go with emotional intelligence. So I think they're indistinguishable. People who practice mindfulness find benefits in emotional intelligence. People who are studying emotional intelligence find mindfulness as a very useful toolkit for practically developing the brain skills necessary to be more continually emotionally intelligent.
Thank you, Deiric. So a couple more just came in. Vanita, one of our partners, said, thanks for the session. I have a deeper understanding of mindfulness and resilience. But a question, a few clients need only mindfulness. In that case, will the emotional intelligence assessment help? And if yes, which one?
Yeah.
The mindful.
You know what? Yeah, you can. Here's where I think the value the real value of emotional intelligence is. Emotional intelligence allows you to see the outcome and the benefits of a mindfulness practice in an organization in the way that people show up. So yeah, there are organizations that we've worked with where we just deliver to them programs that are just purely based upon developing mindfulness practices. But when you give people the perspective of understanding that a focus, let's say in the business world, of developing emotional intelligence skills using mindfulness practices is a great way of monitoring. If you like the return on investment, well then the two of them together are very useful. But you know, there's an old English expression that a man, or indeed a woman, convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. So I would say, you know, if people are just looking for that particular type of program, you know, I give them what they need.
So in that sense, Deiric, to answer Benita's question, yes, any of the assessments would be beneficial in starting that, but ideally working with, say, the Mindful Leader program, which uses a workplace assessment or a leadership assessment, my apologies, would be the best direction for her to go.
Yeah, I think if you're bringing mindfulness into an organization specifically to improve the way that leaders show up, the leadership assessment makes sense. If you're bringing it into an organization to improve the way people show up to one another as a team, well then I would use the workplace assessment. But again, that's something happy to dive into that more.
Michael's asking, how would you suggest that EI-orientated salespeople connect with the prospect at the outset of a meeting? Are there a few techniques that you suggest to connect on an emotional level?
You know, Michael, I think last week, and I really strongly believe there are so many tricks and tips and things that you hear in sales that really come off as being really false, and we all know that when somebody shows really genuine deep interest in us and gives us their full attention and connects with us, that we tend to connect more fully with them. So my approach in general, when I'm approaching new prospects or new clients or people, is to be intentional, as we said last week, as I sit down, to be thinking, I'm going to be open to this person. I'm going to notice what's going on with them. I'm going to notice how they're responding to what I'm saying. I'm going to be genuinely tuned in to what's important to them. And I think people, they feel that, even if they couldn't put their finger on it and say why, they feel your connection, they feel your empathy, they feel your awareness of them. And I think that is the best advice I could give, because when you bring your whole self to meeting somebody and you just open up, intentionally open up that empathy engine, that ability to feel into somebody else's experience, I think people feel that, and that's the connection that you need with folks.
Perfect. Thanks, Deiric. So that is all we have for right now, and we're right at 1/2 the hour. So as Deiric said, folks, you can feel free to send us any questions or comments that you have after the fact to our email. We're happy to answer them and discuss. But what would be even better is going into the LinkedIn group and posting them in there so that everybody else can be involved in the conversation as well. We'll include that follow-up link again in the follow-up email that we'll send out to you probably tomorrow morning at this point.
Yeah, and since Aoife spoke about this last week, we're actually up to, I think, 614 or 615 members in the group, and we got some really intelligent sharing going on in there, some fantastic content, some great conversations, but a lot of really good quality content being harvested from around the web. So if this is a topic that anyway interests you, just make sure that you join up there. We've come to the end. I was
there for a second, Deiric. I'm not sure if it's just me.
Oh,
are you there?
Yes, I am. Hello? Hello?
Ah, hello. There you go.
Oh, yeah, it disappeared. Yeah, you froze for a second. So yeah, anyway, I was just going to say, look, we're moving on. That's our social responsibility project for this year, and we'll do another one of these programs next year. We will be launching this as a self-paced program that you can share with friends. If there's any way we can help, just reach out to us. You have our emails. Meantime, as I said before in previous sessions, if you want to continue and with the practices, well then go and find the Insight Timer on iPhone or on your Android. Look when you get the Insight Timer, which won't cost you a cent. Look for Deiric or Genos, and you'll find all of the practices that we've covered during this session. So you'll see the basic attention practice, and then the one we dealt with today, stopping and dropping, is called dealing with difficult emotions. And that is a great app. It has a lot of really good stuff in there, lots of other guided meditations to help you develop your practice. So that pretty much brings us to the end of things. Aoife has already published this to you. If you have any questions, if we can help in any way, do let us know. But in the meantime, and I thought I saw a message come up there, but I know that Aoife is looking at it, so I'm just going to say thank you. And I seriously want to thank the people who have interacted, because your interactions, your comments, your questions, they really make it these sort of programs worth doing or worthwhile. So until the next time, thank you very much, and have a really, really good day, and have a really, really good life. Take care, folks.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.